Welcome to the Journey to Happy podcast. I am Olga, your host. This is a podcast dedicated to empower women to be the best version of who they are. In here, we tell you stories, we interview ordinary women with extraordinary stories, and we also interview expert guests who can come and give us tips on how to lower worry, how to increase happiness, how to live healthier lives. Today, I am super excited to be introducing you to somebody that I personally actually went to school with. So she's also a social worker. And I had the privilege of working for a couple of years with at my very first job as a social worker. I'm introducing you to Amanda Rocheleau. She is a registered clinical social worker, compassion fatigue specialist, and a public speaker. Today, Amanda owns her private practice based out of Ottawa, where she offers counseling and consulting services for personal caregivers and helping professionals within healthcare, social services, education, and public service settings. Amanda has been featured as a speaker and a trainer on positive workplace practices and personal well-being for over 200 professionals and conference groups. Please help me welcome Amanda into the podcast. And welcome, Amanda. I'm so happy you're here with us.
Thank you very much.
So the reason I invited Amanda to be in this podcast, I was actually talking to her prior to starting this recording. I was giving a talk myself at an organization a couple of weeks ago where I was asked to speak about mindfulness and time management and mindfulness at work and stress reduction. And when I went around the table and I asked people what they wanted to learn the most about, every single participant, and there were 30 or so in the room, talk about recognizing burnout, the symptoms of burnout, how can you prevent it, but also what do you do once you burn out? I would say that 90% of the people that I coach has experienced or is experiencing burnout. And so I thought inviting Amanda would be great to give you guys an understanding of what burnout is and to hear her wisdom about how to perhaps prevent it from happening. And if you're listening to this at a time where you may recognize you're having some of those symptoms, then maybe you can walk away from this podcast understanding the next steps for you to take action for it to not get any worse and to get help. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much. Do you mind telling us, how did you get into it? Because I know you and I went to school together and we were working at a men's shelter about can you believe it's almost 12 years ago?
I know. I can't believe it.
It's a long time. And so we went similar paths, but also different. And so what got you into compassion fatigue and what got you into burnout?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination from my own personal experiences, but then also being able to just watch and look at people around me in the field and just seeing how much of burnout I could see. So I think that I often describe those earlier years on the job as kind of my zealous phase, the time where you're fresh out of school, you feel super equipped, you've got all these fresh skills, you're highly motivated, you feel like you can change the world, and you bring that energy into the job. And then the realities of the work and kind of the cumulative effect of the trauma exposure starts to sort of pile up a little bit. And for me, things really shifted when I started to have children. So two things. One is my self-care practices that I used to be able to put into place that would help me decompress and sort of wind down and cope with the stresses of the job were no longer available to me. I had to end work and zip home and pick kids up from daycare, and there wasn't a lot of time for, the drink after work or the yoga class or the swimming or whatever I used to do. So things changed in that my caregiving role started to extend. It wasn't just 8 to 4 or 5 days a week. It started to sort of extend throughout all of the hours of the day. And then the other piece was that when I would leave on maternity leave, every time I would come back, you kind of gain perspective and sort of get a chance to sort of regroup. when you leave, and then you come back. And what I would find is that I would come back feeling a little bit energized and excited to come back to work. But then my coworkers were exhausted and drained and kind of grumpy. And so I would often sort of become very aware of the experience that everybody was having while I was away. And it was the burnout experience. And the other thing I would notice when I come back from work was that half the time, I mean, I've had 3 children now, so I left for 3 different year-long pregnancy or maternity leaves. But I would come back often to a brand new team, or at least partially, sometimes entirely. So you would realize, in that year that you would step away and then you come back all of a sudden, you'd realize, man, half my team is gone because they, are wanting to, different jobs, like they get burnt out, and then we move on to other positions. So the turnover rate, particularly in the field of social services, is so high. And that's another really big indicator that burnout is really prevalent around the people that we work with.
Yeah, I think so. So thank you for noticing what brought you back into it. Before her and I jump into this recording, we were talking about the obvious, my big belly that's about to pop. Okay, the belly has popped. I am about to pop the belly out back into normal. But we were talking about, my experience having been not a mom for this long, and, the expectations of what's to come and what's to change. And I think this is such a valid point to bring forward, Amanda, as we're starting this conversation, because it's not just for mothers, but that there are transitions in life, and there are moments where we are more reflective, I think, like what you're describing happened in your maternity leaves. You were able to refocus, rethink, get also a break from working. A paid job.
Exactly.
And then coming back. But I think I really would like for everybody listening to this podcast to understand that burnout can come to you from a variety of sources, not just work related.
Absolutely.
And I think, Amanda, you touched base, and I've heard you talk before about this, so I know you'll touch base on that. But that often we notice that when we do get a break, when we do get to step away and then come back with fresh eyes, and we notice whoa, I was burning out and I didn't even know.
Yep.
And so if you don't mind, let's jump let's jump into what are some of the symptoms of burnout? Because some people can confuse burnout with maybe being just highly stressed out, or depression or anxiety. Maybe these are part of those symptoms. How will people listening could recognize that perhaps they're having a case of burnout?
Yeah, so I can definitely answer that. That being said, the signs of burnout, there is a collection of various lists of symptoms. Burnout is a syndrome, which means that it can only be defined by being able to check off a number of symptoms. But those symptoms can be really unique based on the experience leading into the burnout. So like you said, a lot of times the symptoms lists are geared towards symptoms that may show up in a work environment. And we were really fortunate enough that not too long ago, just a matter of months ago, the World Health Organization actually added burnout to its list of mental health diagnosis, which was really huge, because before that, burnout has just kind of been this thing, this word that kind of gets thrown around that's often related to stress. But now it's kind of been named as no, this is actually recognized by the World Health Organization. However, it's frustrating because at the same time, the way they defined it is simply through a work environment or professional experience. So they kind of missed the boat. It's yay, baby steps to moving forward and recognizing burnout. But they kind of missed the boat, because the truth is that burnout is a multi-dimensional experience. It's throughout all of the aspects of our lives that actually contribute to the experience of burnout. So that could be our social life, our personal life, our work life, our health, our parenting life. All of them are contributing factors. So we define burnout by it's different than stress. Burnout is the physical and emotional exhaustion as a result of prolonged stress and frustration. Prolonged is the key word there. We're all equipped to be able to deal with stress. We have a stress response that helps us kind of meet life's demands when those demands kind of reach a pinnacle moment. But when we are chronically exposed to stress, when life's demands seem to constantly outweigh our internal resources, that's when our risk for burnout increases. And I like using kind of some visualization. So I think about it like the empty gas tank, right? So if you're sort of burning the fuel, it doesn't matter at the end of the day how important it is to get from point A to point B. If there is no gas in the car, you're not going anywhere. And that's what burnout feels like when my clients come in and they're talking about burnout, whether they say I'm burnt out or not, because sometimes they just come in and say, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I feel terrible, or I just don't feel like myself, or I just can't get out of bed in the morning. And that's when I start to know, okay, this is the description of burnout. And so the first thing that goes, one of the first signs of burnout is the depletion of energy. Your energy, it just starts to be on that kind of low end. You have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. You have a hard time kickstarting your day. You have a hard time keeping up with that to-do list. You have a hard time at the end of the day to find the energy to make supper. You flop on the couch or in bed, and all you've got energy to do is reach for the remote and the bag of chips because that anything else seems too much. So the first sign is just that chronic energy depletion. And we all have days that are long and hard, but it's that chronic experience.
So it's prolonged. But by the time you call it chronic, this has been happening for a long time, maybe even years.
Yep, totally, absolutely. I've definitely worked with individuals where when we're kind of tracing back and looking at the history, I can see the burnout phase starting years before. And go ahead.
Go ahead. As a clinical therapist myself, that sounds also like depression. So I guess it's a combination of all the symptoms that you're about to say.
Yeah, that's it exactly. So we see that energy depletion, and then the next piece, and this is kind of what you're talking about when it starts looking like depression. The next phase is when you have a really strong decline in enthusiasm. So you not only don't have the energy, but you actually don't have that drive in you anymore. You're not enthusiastic or motivated to tend to your roles in life. So again, whether that be work-related roles or housekeeping or parenting or maintaining a relationship, we just kind of start saying things in our mind like, I just don't really care that much anymore. Or, it just doesn't mean a lot to us anymore to do these things. And so clients that come in and talk to me about their burnout, they're often, they say, well, at first it was really frustrating because I just didn't have the energy to, let's say, keep up with housework. But then something happened where I just didn't even care anymore.
And there's a lack of care that's very important, I think.
Absolutely, and it's true that oftentimes the way I often describe depression is that lack of curiosity, right? And so one of the ways that I help my clients treat their depression is by finding curiosity again in their lives. So that's where it's really connected to that burnout experience too. So that third piece.
So I think it's fair to say that some people who are in burnout may also be experiencing depression.
Yeah, they overlap. There are a ton of different, I guess, kind of conditions that we could look at here that really end up overlapping. Okay. And so the symptoms of burnout may look like anxiety or may look like depression. And oftentimes they go in and they might describe their experience to their physicians, and their physician says, sounds like depression, and prescribes medication or treatment for depression. But that might be helpful in some cases, but oftentimes what I find is that depression is a symptom, not the actual root issue.
Yeah. Like there might be times when there is actually chemical imbalances.
Totally.
They need the medication, but do you find their doctors are more or your clients like get that push for the medication rather sooner than maybe talking to a specialist or a therapist?
Yeah. Yeah, I still see that pattern in our healthcare system, that physicians tend to look at sort of the biological aspect of health. And as you know, as a social worker, I'm trained in kind of looking at the multi dimensions of a person. So as we describe it, the biopsychosocial aspects of an individual. So sure, the biology of our experience, whether we're talking about anxiety, depression, or burnout, is a really important aspect to look at, but it's not the only piece. We have to look at the psychological piece, that the contributing factors, in terms of, our cognitive schemas, our thinking, like the way our thought patterns and the way we talk to ourselves, our emotions, our perceptions, our core beliefs, all of those impact our experience with, again, burnout, depression, or anxiety. And then there's that social aspect, right, which I think is often neglected, and something that I focus on a lot in my practice is asking my clients, where are your social supports? Who's there for you? And sometimes we kind of create these sort of categories of individuals, like who's in your, tight knit circle, and who's a little outside of that, and who are your acquaintances. And but we're not supposed to go through this world alone. We need some community and connection. So I focus on that a lot as a really key treatment tool in treating any sort of mental health condition, including burnout. It's building up the social network. So I think doctors miss that.
Okay. So in terms of symptoms, and there is this lack of motivation, there is this lack of energy,
yeah,
this lack of curiosity that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
How do you know when your clients are talking to you, 100% you have burnout? What is the thing that tells you, like, there is no way that, like, I'm so positive that this is what's going on with you?
Well, I kind of have like a mental checklist that as they usually are sharing their story, I kind of have that list that I'm going, check, there it is. So I look at about two ways. One is the contributing factors that I know and that research tells us are leading contributing factors to burnout. Mm-hmm. And then the other is the symptoms.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about the contributing factors that research tells us. One is workload. That's the given. We all kind of, I think, associate that with burnout the most. That if you just have really huge job demands, that are kind of exceeding your ability to actually meet those job demands, that's going to increase your risk of burnout. So when clients come in and they tell me that they're working multiple jobs, that they often stay late at work, that they're often asked to take on other roles and responsibilities or other caseloads for other people, that they don't feel like they've got a lot of resources to work with. That's the kind of the list as they're telling me all of that, I'm going, okay, I can tell right away that your workload is completely exceeding your ability to actually meet all those demands.
I see.
And again, that's not just about at work, but when they start telling me their whole story, like, first I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I make the lunches and I get the kids on the bus, and then I go to my first job, and then I go to my second job, and then I pick the kids up at 6 o'clock at night, and then I make them supper, and then I bring them to soccer, and then you're like, whoa, like that's a lot in a day. Another contributing factor is one's sense of control in their life. So, do you feel like your voice is heard? Are you able to make decisions about your day or about your performance or how you meet those work demands, on your own? Are you autonomous, or is there somebody kind of breathing down your neck all the time, telling you what to do? Is your role unclear and always changing? Like, you never know when you're going to go into work and like what your actual job is going to be. You're told suddenly you had an idea that you were going to work, I don't know, doing groups that day, and then you showed up and your supervisor tells you, no, actually, I need you over in this other department and you're going to go over there, and they throw you into another job. So that kind of stuff, just a sense of lack of control over being able to make decisions. And that, clients tend to, as they tell their story, I kind of usually start checking that off on my mind too, right? Wow, there's a lot of things happening to you and around you, and you don't get a lot of say in it. And I know that that's going to increase their risk for burnout.
I think another point you were just bringing up is the insecurity and the lack of self-confidence that cripples in with specifically burnout. I know personally for me, when I was burning out, for the first time in my life, I felt incompetent, something that I had never felt, a lack of self-security that I used to have and confidence that I used to have, that I was good at my job. I was no longer feeling good at my job because there was such an overload of work that, yes, I was missing things, and somebody just pointing at those things. And I think, do you feel that often when people come to see me and they're on burnout, there is usually a negative relationship somewhere. And it could be with a manager, it could be if it's at work, and I find that at least what happened to me and what I've seen happening to my clients is that often in that relationship, we feel that there's this person pointing at the things that we're not doing right, which we're already feeling so lack of energy, so not motivated, that it's so much easier to start thinking that there's something definitely wrong with us, but we don't really see to the environment or what is causing for that burnout.
Yeah, that's a complicated situation that often comes up because criticism and interpersonal problems can both be a contributing factor as well as a symptom. So sometimes I have to kind of tease that out and determine, is there really this toxic relationship that in your life right now that could be a really major contributing factor to your symptoms of burnout? Or is it the symptom of burnout where you are lacking confidence and you have decreased satisfaction in your performance and you have a really low sense of accomplishment? And that's just sort of this biased perspective that comes with the experience of burnout. And is that what is actually being described to me? And in reality, people are not quite as critical as my client may perceive them to be. So I have to really tease it out to sort of get more information. And what I do is I often ask my clients questions to sort of search for evidence. So when they say things like, I really suck at my job, and or I suck as a parent, and I'm just failing, and I'm really not getting the job done, and I have to sort of explore, what is the evidence that this is actually happening? So in a work environment, have you been written up? Has somebody given you feedback? And then sometimes it's yes, and sometimes there's evidence in their personal lives that their relationships are at jeopardy or they're struggling. But then other times it's through that line of questioning, I conclude that they're actually just perceiving all of that. And there isn't any evidence. In fact, sometimes the evidence is the opposite. Their kids are still really grateful and affectionate, and their partner is trying to be supportive and open, or their worker or their peers are not actually doing or saying anything to make them feel lesser than. So sometimes it really is just the symptom of burnout that makes us feel like, our life's a big hot mess and we're not performing well.
Mm-hmm. So in terms you kind of jump into self-care, and so maybe if you feel that we've covered symptoms for people listening and thinking of what that would be like for them. And again, keeping in mind, guys, that burnout does not strictly come from work, although the majority of us will say it was influenced by work. And it makes sense. We do spend the majority of our awakened time working.
Yeah.
Um, if you're an employee, yeah. And so it kind of makes sense that that would be the place where we will feel the most amount of weight on our shoulders for things that we've got to accomplish. I've noticed amongst most people who have been burned out, me included, a sense of perfectionism. We strive to just do things not just okay, but 200%. And I believe that over time, you can't really sustain that level of work. It's just not feasible. And so something that I'm a huge advocate for, obviously, with my mindfulness specialty, is self-care. And I was just going over your website, Amanda, and I see that you have a little clip under the website on your first page that says you're a self-care advocate. And it kind of makes sense. I can't imagine you being a certified compassion fatigue therapist and a traumatic incident reduction practitioner without thinking of self-care. And something that you said earlier that made me just want to ask you is, you said that before you had children, you had your self-care plan where you worked and then you took care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And after having children, that kind of like left because you didn't have the time. How strong will you say your self-care practice was prior to becoming a mother?
Well, I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
My perspective on it now has changed. At the time, it served a purpose. My self-care practices were very much around doing something pleasant. So, or kind of addressing my health needs, so getting good night's sleep, eating healthy, I enjoyed yoga classes a lot. I went to meditation classes. I was generally more social. I would have the time to be able to actually go out for coffee or go do activities with with my friends. And, I don't know, I just had more of a social life. Like, you went to the movies with my husband and you would do nice things for yourself. That was kind of the way I practice self-care. But what I realized over the years as sort of my own burnout was approaching and things became more and more difficult once I had kids was that all of my self-care activities were they were activities. There were things I was doing. And many times I was, like the example I always give when I'm doing a presentation is one of the things I started doing after I had kids was swimming because my body ached. I couldn't walk or run very well. My hips were all out of line. And so I was like, oh, okay, how am I going to get my exercise and practice self-care at the same time? So I'd go swimming. And so there I would be swimming away, thinking I'm quote unquote practicing self-care. And the whole time, all I would be doing is thinking about the things I need to do, the things I haven't done, what am I going to make for supper? And now because I choose to be here, I can't go home and make a really, good supper. And so it's going to be fast. And what am I doing? And are my kids okay? And have I spent enough time with them? And I'm worrying about my client who's going to relapse tonight. And, and then looking back on that going, isn't that funny that I used to call that self-care? Because throughout that entire experience, while I'm swimming, I'm not really caring for myself at all, right? I'm not really tuned into me. I'm still thinking about other people or things I haven't done or this big long to-do list. So the way I describe self-care now is that it is about a deliberate practice about knowing my own needs and desires and then taking responsibility for them. So it's less about what I do and more about how I do it. We can all sit in the hot bubble bath and call that self-care, but again, the whole time, not really tuning into our needs and desires. I can also sit in the hot bubble bath and really be reflective and self-aware and self-compassionate. And that's what makes it a self-care practice. It's not the bath itself. So I used to I think that my whole self-care practices, they worked at the time, but they were missing that attitude component that I just didn't realize was so important until later in my life.
And this is massive, and I think we should dive into that. I think one of my favorite phrases to say when I'm teaching anything or when I'm coaching people is we don't always anticipate or know or are in control of what's going to show up into our life. But the thing we always control is our attitude towards that event.
Yes.
And I know from the people I work with, in the subject that we work on the most is their attitude towards self-care, towards burnout, towards work, that work ethic that makes them feel that they got to work 100 hours in 1 week and that there's no time for lunch and that there's no time, or like the mothers who just want to care for everybody else. And the end of the day comes by and they never took a moment to check in with themselves.
Yeah.
How am I doing? I need time off. And there is a lot of guilt that comes associated, I think, with self-care. We think it's selfish. And I encourage people to be selfish every day of the week. Because I think that's how there will be so little problems in this world if everybody was being selfish about taking care of their needs. If we didn't rely on somebody else, on my boss to say, hey, Olga, it looks like you need time off, for me to give myself permission to take time off. Yeah. If we didn't rely on a therapist or another peer mother who said like, hey, you know what? Take a break from your children. That's okay. It's you're not a bad mother. In fact, you'd be a much happier mother if you do that. Yeah. So why don't we just jump into maybe your favorite 5 suggestions for self-care for people to practice? And these guys, I'm a huge advocate of self-care as well myself. I embody that. I really try my best to embody it. So I don't just teach it, I practice it. And I can tell you, I was just telling Amanda, looking back at why this last trimester of my pregnancy has been more, I've been more prone to anxiety. If I look back, it's also been accumulating. I've been working harder because I'm about to go off. So I have postponed self-care. And I can tell you right now, I can point at what has changed in my mental health, in my well-being, my physical health, because skipping the things that have become a part of my life routine. So I would love to, the listeners have probably heard, and I will probably join in sharing some of mine, but what are your favorite, what is it that you usually suggest to your burnout people for self-care?
Well, I always say that the fundamentals to self-care begin with self-awareness and self-compassion. And so self-awareness is just like what you were mentioning there. It's the turning the spotlight on us and tuning into what we need and what we want. And I think as caregivers, as a parent, as a social worker, I am so in tune to the needs of others. That skill has been well refined, and it makes me a great parent and social worker for sure. But along the way, as that skill of being in tune to the needs of others was more refined, then I think I stopped paying attention to the skill of looking at myself. So, and then, you kind of described something too, that we can our mind can kind of get in the way sometimes, where we think we need something, but what we really need is something else. I think a lot of times with my clients, they might sort of talk about, let's say, needing to stay in a relationship and fix a relationship or something like that. And in the end, when we get to the root of it, the real need is connection. Mm-hmm. And when they kind of discover what the true need is there, I need to feel connected, they end up finding really creative ways to meet that need. And it's not just through the relationship. It's actually through all sorts of other ways that they connect with other people in their lives. So self-awareness is really important, like tuning into self.
Yeah. And that's when I would say mindfulness. And if you guys have no idea what mindfulness is, this is a great opportunity for you to become familiar with mindfulness. It's a practice that everybody can use. That it's not like some kind of complex science. Everybody can apply practices of mindfulness. The best gift that I've ever received from practicing mindfulness on a regular basis is self-awareness, which is exactly what Amanda is talking about in here. Like that, like there's a phrase that I tell my clients all the time and my students: fish don't know they're in water until they're pulled out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you might not be aware of many things, and as far as you're not aware of those things, you cannot possibly begin to make changes. You don't know what's stressing you out. You don't know, like Amanda was saying, and like Amanda was describing a scenario where she guided people through a process. But if you don't have a coach, if you don't have a counselor, then just by learning more about yourself, by becoming more familiar with who you are and what triggers you, what are your needs, the easier it will be for you to implement an action plan. Action being key in the key word in that. An
Absolutely.
action plan for you to just begin to walk the steps that you need to take care of your needs.
Yeah, and I think along with understanding your needs and desires, it's also understanding, as you said, kind of the warning signs, the signs that come up in our body, in our thinking, in our behaviors, that tell us when something's not right or when we're out of balance or maybe not meeting those needs. So for me, for example, I know one of my warning signs when I'm starting to kind of bottle things up and I'm not really expressing maybe my thoughts or my true feelings, I hold a lot of tension in my jaw. And so I start clenching, right? And that tension builds up. So for me, just tuning into my jaw and, whether it's really tight and sore or whether it feels loose and I can feel relaxed in my face, that's just one of those warning signs that if I can just remember to tune into that and kind of massage my cheeks, that I'll be able to sort of tell. That's sort of one of my guides to like, okay, is something missing or are you on the right track,
So this is a great point. How do we create awareness? So Amanda just described a physical symptom. Do you guys know, can you recognize what your body feels under stress? Do you know what's a red flag for you? Do you know that the body's getting, if you do not know, when you're feeling stressed out, start taking notes of what feels like what. What does the chest feel like? How are you sleeping? That's how you can begin to generate awareness. Like journaling will be a key part of creating awareness. And then just bringing your attention span or your attention to what's going on for you right now. And then just see if you can kind of follow the sequence. Like Amanda was saying, like, how did she jump from a jaw that's sore to saying, this is a sign of stress? No, she was attentive. She was trying to answer the question of how do I recognize stress in my body? So I think this is key for awareness. What will be your second point then after awareness?
After awareness is self-compassion. So I think one of the things that prevent a lot of people from practicing mindfulness or doing self-reflection or self-awareness work is that we're afraid that if we look at ourselves, we're going to notice that we're flawed beings and we're going to notice our imperfections. And sometimes we don't want to see that. So we look away and we don't tune in. So I think to make self-awareness easier, we have to match it with self-compassion. We have to treat ourselves kindly and accept our common humanity. Our common humanity is the fact that we are all beings who suffer, who make mistakes, who are imperfect. And that is part of our common human experience. A lot of times, people isolate themselves. I see that a lot with my clients. They think they're the only ones who aren't managing their stress. They think they're the only ones who's not coping well at work or struggling. They think they're the only parent that has, that gets stressed out or sometimes just really gets so frustrated they hate parenting. And so self-compassion is really, really important in treating ourselves kindly. So the rule that I often present is you want to listen to your internal thoughts. And if you're journaling, read that journal and go back and ask yourself, would I say that to a child, or to somebody I care for?
So,
And if the answer is no, then you have room to increase or improve on your self-compassion, right? We want to treat ourselves as kindly as we treat others.
yeah. So, yeah. And I would add to this, just for anybody listening, the promise of a practice of mindfulness is compassion and joy. Mm-hmm. That's actually a part of your brain that would have been developed through a practice of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. It's kind of nice that they go hand in hand, and how I agree with you, Amanda. I think that most of us, and that was me, we would look away from looking at our needs because we're afraid of what we're going to see. Like, what are my needs? How big are my needs? How much time am I going to have to supply these needs? So I think that even recognizing that awareness, to bring in awareness to that fact that you may have a fear of understanding you better, and that's okay. You don't take that with that compassion that Amanda is talking about, that kindness that you would display towards a child or a friend. Mm-hmm. Okay, what will be another big self-care tip or suggestion?
I think another piece is learning skills around self-regulation. So what I notice with a lot of the people that I work with is that their nervous system is kind of out of whack. And so I think that we get really caught up in this really busy lifestyle sometimes. We get caught up in the doing and the moving and the going. And we don't balance that out with the stillness and the recovery periods. The recovery periods that our mind needs, that our body needs, that our nervous system requires in order to function in harmony and in balance. And so I see a lot of people just kind of like basically running off of adrenaline and stress hormones. And I think our balance and our ability to sort of self-regulate is really important. So those are various different types of tools that I teach my clients as well. Everything from mindfulness to, again, recognizing the signs, creating life patterns, daily patterns to be able to introduce and bring in moments of decompression and relaxation, practicing grounding skills. I particularly as a psychotherapist, I use grounding skills a lot myself, because when I'm doing trauma therapy with people, it can kind of get really intense, and the energy that happens in the room can kind of, I feel it, And so I have practices in my life where I, in between clients, go and use the washroom and look at myself in the mirror, make some eye connection with my own self, wash my hands, go through kind of a cleansing process while taking deep breaths and just paying attention to my body and sort of regulating that after kind of some trauma exposure, and then preparing myself for my next experience with maybe the next client, or going home, and not bringing that energy home.
And I am
sorry
with our guests.
I don't know why that happened. There you go. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Everything's good though? We're still recording?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
My computer just jumped into opening another podcast. So
yeah, that stop and like stopping the mind and the body, and just sort of like kind of that roller coaster effect, sort of having those, up where the energy's up and things are, you're taking action, you're moving, and then finding the moments to decompress and self-regulate is, I think, a really, really important point in self-care. And again, just to add that, again, sometimes even what we think are self-care practices are only perpetuating that cycle of like the doing and the going and the moving. And so we need to have self-care practices that are about being still and decompressing. So if somebody kind of says, oh, well, my self-care practice is going out after work with my friends and going shopping, that might be an enjoyable experience, but it's still really energy consuming. And so it may not really be the answer, the full self-care answer, when, you already have been giving a lot of energy throughout your day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that goes hand in hand with what I teach people too. When you think of self-care, if your immediate response is something outside of you, I would ask you to stop and think of, okay, so how can I bring that back to me?
You got
In
it.
other words, if your self-care is like a massage, which is amazing. I'm not saying that doesn't help your to restore precisely what Amanda was saying, the nervous system. It does help, but we can't sustain a massage every day or sometimes once a week. They're expensive. So how can you create that attitude that takes care of yourself no matter what by just, making better choices? That's part of self-care, right? Like to choose to eat the foods that nourish your body versus the ones that create inflammation, for example. To choose to rest when you're tired versus just pushing yourself that extra mile because you're afraid of what people are going to say.
Yeah.
Choose to speak your truth versus just pretending that all is good. Those are choices that have a lot to do with your self-care. So self-care, as we're presenting it to you, is more so than just taking care of some of the needs, like getting a massage done, but taking care of your needs from you to you, where you're responsible for your well-being. You get to know what you need. If you need stronger connections, that's on you. Then maybe you'll be the person who needs to reach out to those friends and see them more often. So I think this is a really great example or a really great tip, Amanda, for self-care, for sure. And I think that helps us kind of break down the idea we have of self-care. Like, I must be rich to be able to take care of myself so I can go on vacations or to pay a membership at a gym or a yoga studio or, whatever perception. So I would ask listeners right now to just write down or stop and reflect on what is your perception of self-care? What do you identify self-care as? And why is it that do you say, do you not have time for that? Because in my idea of self-care, it happens all the time. It's not just a moment of self-care. I'm taking care of myself at all times. So I don't really have to necessarily dedicate an extra hour of my day to taking care of myself. Because it's that attitude of just like, I'll work till my body says I need a break, and then I'll go to the bathroom, or then I'll go for a walk, or I'll stop and I take my breaks and I eat my lunch. Excuse me. So I think that's key.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that that's the kind of thing I hear a lot from my clients is, the yeah, but statements, the yeah, it would be nice, but, and then there are all these reasons why, or, this list of barriers for practicing what they consider self-care. And so it's about breaking down those kind of normative ideas, the idea that, really, if you Google right now, how to practice self-care, or like 101 tips for practicing self-care, you get this big long list that is just kind of, it makes me laugh every time. It's always like pet a dog or like buy some shoes. It's like, we really, and that's the kind of information that I think impacts people's perception of what self-care is. So it's really about an attitude. And yes, there are times where things, money's tight, energy is low, time is scarce. We have a lot of responsibilities. There are times where the other trumps, my whole plan for self-care. Like, how many times have I had a plan to, take a night to myself and decompress and do something pleasant. And then, lo and behold, a child has a fever and is up crying and, and that kind of thing. So we have to learn how to be able to tend to ourselves and provide care for ourselves in moments, even when, life's not presenting this ideal situation where we can go do something super pleasant for ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that if you guys are walking away with one thing out of this podcast, is that self-care is your attitude towards everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's part of keeping you as important as that child that is sick, as important as that work assignment, as important as, anything that you may give, like,
Absolutely.
big importance to.
Yep.
So, okay, I'm super aware of time. I'm talking about children. I know you have to go pick up yours. Where can people contact you? Why would somebody want to see a burnout specialist or a compassion fatigue specialist for counseling?
Well, I'm located here in Ottawa, and I have my website that I guess you'll make available, right, to everybody, Olga.
I will.
My website is my name, amandarocheleau.com. On that website, I have a tab of free resources. So a lot of things we talked about today, there are some tools there that might be useful to you. Some things around gaining self-awareness, some like warning signs, kind of worksheets that you could do independently, mood trackers, a journal, a kind of a self-care journal that can kind of direct you and guide you in asking yourself some questions that allow you to be more self-reflective and think about self-compassion and self-awareness. So there's a lot of resources there on my website that I try to make available to folks, as well as some links to, other information on the World Wide Web, including a number of different assessments. And I think these assessments that are posted on my site are, a lot of people are really unaware of them. We often look at scales and assessments for depression and anxiety, but these ones are really specific to the different kind of experience, such as measuring symptoms of burnout or compassion fatigue, or the impact of trauma information, and so on. So there's a ton of resources there that I hope are helpful for folks. When people get in touch with me, it's usually for a number of reasons, but simply put, if you have that sense of just not feeling balanced, not feeling like yourself, feeling like more is going out than is being able to be replenished, then I welcome you to get in touch. And there's a number of different services that might be helpful, including some group work and some support groups that are happening here in Ottawa, as well as, one-on-one counseling or coaching services. And a lot of people just really, once we start talking about some things and we kind of break down some of those barriers, shift the perspective and thinking about self-care, I see a lot of people see some quick improvements in managing their day-to-day stress and shifting their perspective on their caregiving roles. So yeah, I'm there, and the best way to contact me is right through my website.
Perfect. So stay tuned for, it's going to be in the comments of this podcast. You'll be able to have the link to Amanda's website. Amanda, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to just meet me and my audience. I know that this subject is one of extreme importance, and I know that people are going to be appreciative of the tips that you've suggested in here. Thank you for being so open and so candid about even your own experience. And I think that is something for you guys to remember as well. Even the experts, even the doctors, we're all equally exposed to being burnout. For me, I was burnout once. It was intense enough that I said, I'm learning from this one and this is never happening again. And my commitment to self-care came from having burnout, because I had zero commitment to my self-care prior to that. But I was not even aware of that. So it's just creating that awareness. So if you're going through a burnout right now, I just want you to know there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is people you can reach out to. If you're not in Ottawa, you can't reach Amanda. You can certainly contact me. Let me know where you're at. If you'd rather see somebody personally and locally, find that person. There are a lot of therapists, there are a lot of coaches out there who will want to give you a hand and support you through this. Amanda touched on the importance of creating community. There is definitely a community of people. We have all experienced some type of burnout, and just talking about it already breaks that silence and makes you connect with people. Isolation will not make you feel better, even though your mind may tell you that. It's not the truth. Amanda, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. For you listening, if you like this podcast, let us know. Please leave us a review. The best way for me to keep bringing good guest speakers into the podcast is by increasing my number of reviews. That's how we get noted. That's how the podcast gets better ranking on the charts, and that's what brings people into the podcast. This is all free content that we're so excited to put for you. And so all we ask is that you give us a review, that you share it with somebody if you think that this is of relevance to somebody else. Share the information. Don't just keep it to yourself. If you found it interesting, probably other people will as well. And if you want to reach out to either one of us, our links will be added to this podcast. Thank you so much from my heart to yours. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Amanda. And see you guys all soon.